Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm delighted to welcome the New York Yankees mental performance coach, Lauren Abarca. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, no, I'm delighted, and you're currently residing in you're in California, aren't you? So this is a transatlantic call right now.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about you. Let's get some background before we start delving into the world of baseball psychology and the nitty-gritty of sports psychology in general, which we both have an anarachish interest in. Let's find out where that anarachish interest in sports psychology came from. So, tell the Sports Psych Show audience a bit about yourself, your sporting background and educational background, etc., etc.
Yeah, so I grew up playing sports my whole life. And actually, before I get started, I just wanted to also make sure, so they call me, I'm a mental conditioning coach for the New York Yankees. And essentially, like, I started playing sports since I was little. I want to say I was 5 years old. I started playing soccer and just fell in love with sports, like absolutely fell in love. And I had a very big interest, I guess, in college when I kind of got to that level, and I guess, I really wanted to be the best. I mean, it was a drive of mine, but I wanted to know, why do people with equal talent, why is one person successful and one isn't? And that's kind of what got my interest going. And so I actually studied kinesiology, and I minored in psychology in my undergrad.
Yep.
And originally wanting to go into physical therapy. And I really found out that I loved my connection with my patients, but I didn't love kind of a lot of the medical side of it as much. So I was like, man, what if I could mix together my love for the patients with psychology and sport? Like, how can I mix that together? And I ended up finding a course in sports psychology. And it's actually kind of funny because one of my assignments in undergrad was to interview somebody in the field, and I ended up interviewing the director of my master's program that I ended up going to, and just fell in love with it. And from there on, I got my master's degree in performance psychology, and owned my own consulting business for about a year, and then got an opportunity with the Yankees.
It's really interesting. You said there, you made a statement that I was asking why or what is it that helps people make it, or why do some make it and some don't? And I think you were playing soccer at college, weren't you? So you were a good Division 1, Division 2 player. So here's a question for you, because as a golfer, I think what held me back was I was always asking why. Why do I feel like this? Why do I see the bunker and the trees and the rough and I don't see the fairway? And I almost felt that got in my way. It was a bit of paralysis by analysis. I don't know if you experienced the same, but do you think it got in the way at all of your soccer, or was it just a case of you just loved the why and you just thought, I want to go into this side of it rather than playing?
No, I definitely struggled with it. And I really struggled with the comparing side of it, and constantly seeing where I stood, instead of just going out there and playing my best soccer, like my best that I had for that day, and kind of looking at that compared to my former best. So I definitely struggled with paralysis by analysis a bunch, and I think it sparked my interest because it was so relatable to myself.
Right. Okay. And is some of your work today shaped on your experiences as a soccer player?
100%. Definitely. I think it's hard to navigate conversations with athletes when you haven't felt some of the struggles yourself. You certainly won't feel all their struggles, but I think there's something to say for having some experience in it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, when I stand in front of a bunch of soccer players, although I didn't play soccer, I was a very bad soccer player at school, but I can certainly say that I travelled Europe playing golf and know what it's like to feel nervous over a 2-foot putt or feel nervous before a round. And I think that I don't know what you think, but I don't think you have to have played elite sports to be a great sports psychologist. But I do think it helps, doesn't it, to know what it's like to have been in the boots or the shoes of a competitor.
I could not agree more. I mean, I work with several different athletes with several different backgrounds, and I can't certainly, specifically relate to their position, but we all know how pressure feels. We all know how it feels to not feel confident. We all know how it feels to lose focus. And so those are those relatable pieces that we can kind of all agree on.
Absolutely. So, how did the position, if you don't mind me asking, how did the position at the Yankees come about? You'd left college. You'd finished your qualifications to become a mental conditioning coach, and started up your own private practice. I guess you were working with sports competitors from a range of sports, and did they come knocking, or how did this fantastic, exciting position come about?
Yeah, well, they definitely didn't come knocking.
Okay.
I would be lying if I said that. I definitely knocked at their doors, and many of them didn't answer. But I kind of started with my own consulting company because there just wasn't anything. I guess jobs are kind of hard to come by in our field. So I decided, well, if I'm going to be picky with what I get, then I need to create something myself. And so I kind of went into my private practice with the idea I knew I wanted to go after MLB. And so I started seeking clients that were baseball related.
Why MLB? Why did you want to go after that? You're a soccer player. Why MLB?
You know what? I've always been fascinated by the game.
Okay.
I grew up in a baseball family, and also I knew that was a field that was booming, and that was kind of the next one to take off. And so for me, I was like, that's my target. It was an easy one.
This is it, isn't it? It's amazing. Look, now I don't know. Disclaimer here: I don't know a huge amount about baseball, and I interviewed Sean Larkin, a baseball coach, a few months ago for the Sports Psych show, and we had a fantastic chat. And I was saying to him, it feels like I don't know if I read a statistic or I'm just making this up, but it all just feels this way. But about 80% of MLB teams have a sports psych or mental conditioning coach now, don't they?
Yeah, several of them do. There's only a few teams that don't, and if there's a team that does have one, they may have one, but teams are starting to build teams or departments around sports psych.
Wow, okay, that sounds very forward-thinking, and yet in contrast to what you said there about you went knocking on doors, and it sounds like you got a bit of pushback. How come? What do people say to you when they push you back? Is it that, wow, we don't need sports psychology, this is a waste of time, this is what do they say?
Well, I think it was more of like they didn't know what it was, and so like
right.
They'd say like we don't really have the funds for that, or no, we're okay, we don't have any issues on our team. And I think that's a big stigma that's starting to be attacked. And that, anything, whenever you use the word mental, I think people think of that as like, oh, I'm being labeled. Oh, I have a problem. And, we have a phrase that we use in the Yankees all the time. You don't have to be sick to get better. And so it's kind of like we work with the having the best season of their lives, but we're also working with the athletes that are not doing well and everything in between. So some people are striving to improve. Some people are working on maintaining, and some people are working on pushing the envelope. And no matter where you fall, you can always get better. You're never too good to get better.
Absolutely. You can always strive for better, can't you? You can always strive for better. And so as a mental conditioning coach, when you sit down with a competitor, and I suppose I'm asking you a slightly unfair question here because everybody's different, but how do you go about your work? How do you go about that conversation? Is there a specific framework you'll use, or is it very organic? How do you approach being a sports psych within a session?
I'm definitely more organic. I would say if I had to pick a framework I kind of choose, it would be like a cognitive behavioral framework. However, my first approach is getting to know the person. I think it's very difficult to bring about change when you don't have that relationship. And so the first thing is that, that it's not my choice for the change to happen. Of course, I challenge my athletes, and I may talk to them about certain like situations like, hey, I saw this today. Like, what do you got for that? And we may then have an organic conversation that way. But if they're like, no, I'm good, I'm not going to sit there and be like, well, no, you're not. It's more of like a very organic conversation in terms of not only just how they're doing on the field, but how are they doing off the field? How is their relationships with their family, relationships with their spouses or significant others? Those are things that are really important to me because I think that deeper level of understanding can really help guide the conversation in terms of stuff that is happening on the field.
It's interesting, isn't it? You talk about relationships with people. Do you think getting to know their personality helps you impact change? Do you think personality influences development and performance within a competitive environment?
Yes, I 100% wholeheartedly do. I think it's hard to, especially in baseball, I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to tell somebody to give somebody your opinion on their game, or to give somebody your opinion on something that they need to change, or you feel is maybe disrupting their performance when you don't know them. Because, I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a pitcher, and for most people, it's the slower the movements, the more controlled they are, and the better the performance. Well, that's not true for some of our guys. Some of our guys are very fast-paced workers. And if you didn't know him, you'd be like, oh my God, that guy's freaking out. He's struggling. He may be, if you were just observing him and you didn't realize that that's actually how he works best, you could totally misinterpret some of the observations and the actions that he's taking. And so I think it's super important to know their personalities, not only when you're one-on-one with them and knowing what works well for them, but also learning them by observing their actions and observing what's normal, what is kind of the baseline, and then what falls on either side of that for each person.
So observation sounds like it's a massive part of your role in your work there.
Huge, very big.
And what are you looking for? So when are you looking? Where specifically are you watching? And what are you looking for?
Right. I'm looking for, I'm looking for inconsistencies. Okay. So I want to see things that maybe they wouldn't typically do, but then I'm also looking for really great consistencies. So I think it's very easy in our field to look for deficiencies and look for things that we need to change, but I'm also looking for things that are creating success for them. And that could be, just before an at-bat, what's their routine? Are they consistent with their routine on the on-deck circle? And then in between pitches, are they stepping out of the box, or are they maintaining in it? And is that affecting them? Are they speeding up after the pitcher throwing a strike, or are they calm and just resetting themselves before they get back in? And then for a pitcher, after someone just hits a bomb off of you, are you quick to get it back on the rubber and to just work fast, or are you still slowing down and maintaining that pace that you've had the whole game? So I'm looking for all sorts of things. A lot of it has to do with pace. A lot of it has to do with their routine, especially if you know it. You can pick out a routine if it's very consistent. It makes it difficult, obviously, if they don't have one. So that's where knowing the person is important. And then also responses to good and bad events, because speeding up doesn't just happen when bad events occur. It can also happen when good ones do too. And, are we being complacent, or are we still trying to maintain that control regardless of the outcome?
I love what you said there, Lauren, about looking for the positives, because I think that as sports psychs, as coaches, as sports scientists, we're on the lookout for what's not working too often. We condition ourselves in that respect, because perhaps we find ourselves as fault fixers, or maybe even in a positive way solution finders, but actually being on the lookout for what is strong, what works, enables us to affirm and congratulate and celebrate with the athlete, in your case, the baseball player. By affirm, I mean, I love it when you do this. It looks like you're successful as a pitcher or a batsman when you do this and this. That can foster relationships as well, can't it?
Mm-hmm. Totally, because, you're not just paying attention to when I'm doing something bad. You're paying attention all the time. And to me, that shows a really deep understanding of a player and a deep care for the player. Hey, I don't want to just point out the things that you're struggling with, but I also want to celebrate your victories with you. And I think that not only helps foster the relationship, but that also helps foster self-awareness. Because when we know what makes us successful, it's easier to point out when we're not. It's easier to point out the things that we start to stray away from that. You know, when we start seeing so much success, do we get away from that? Do we kind of take our foot off the gas pedal? Or when we're really, really struggling, are we able to go back to our baseline? Are we able to go back to the things we know make us successful? And so I think there's so much benefit to having the balance between what do I need to do better and what do I do well.
You use that term self-awareness, and I found in my work self-awareness to be almost the core skill, the key skill to change. And it's, I'd love to get your comment in a second. I find that there's such a disparity in self-awareness between competitors. Some are super aware for the good and sometimes to their detriment, and others have so little awareness. And again, that can lead to mixed results. Sometimes that actually can help them, or perhaps that creates a ceiling to their ability. But some people have very, very little awareness, and it can really hold them back. What have you found in your work?
I definitely agree with you. It is the foundation, I think, of all mental skills. And one of the most important ones. And just like you, I think anything taken to an extreme can be a detriment. And so I have players that are terribly unself-aware, and then I have players that are too self-aware. And it kind of creates that paralysis by analysis. And so it's really finding balance to the best of our abilities. And I do think most players tend to fall on one side or the other, but I think fostering that understanding when it's beneficial and when it's not, and noting, being able to draw self-awareness to those areas can help us then place our attention where it's needed and place our attention on the things that are helpful and help make us successful.
I found that quite often, broad brush statement here, but I found that the players who could be construed as the most talented or found the game found it easy to develop their game from a young age are the ones who perhaps lack self-awareness because they've never really had to think about it, they've never really had to check in, whereas the ones who have always had to work very hard to improve their skills are players who have had to be really, really self-aware, and so subsequently they overthink.
Definitely. And I think sometimes with players that tend to not be as self-aware, tend to seek comfort more often, because that's the comfort of knowing, what they do well, the comfort of knowing success and knowing what that feels like. So instead of going in and having purposeful practice and going in and having a purpose to, being in the cages, and this is my target, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm just going to go in and hit as many balls as I possibly can until I feel good. And that can become a detriment within itself. And seeking can I have, one of our biggest pet peeves is when players say can I have one more? Well, you're not going to get one more in a game. And so we need to be focusing more on what can you do with what you have versus continuing to practice, even though you may not need it. And it's comfort. It's a comfort thing that they begin to seek instead of a factual thing.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah, I hadn't necessarily seen it that way before. And sticking to this topic of self-awareness, I think obviously coaches have a real influence here, can make a real difference. And again, with my work, what I found is that coaches who tend to be very directive in their coaching, they're constantly instructing, aren't necessarily appreciating the value of self-awareness. They're just telling players what to do. They're not getting players to reflect on their own skills and think about their own solutions. Can that happen in baseball? Can coaches be quite directive to the detriment of building self-awareness? Yeah,
and I think that's any coach in general. I mean, even ourselves.
Yeah.
When we're not asking the right questions, we tend to give answers because the right questions can direct our athletes to better answers. And I think Tony Robbins said it. He said, if you want better answers, ask better questions. And to me, I think that a lot of times we give answers when we're not getting the answer that we want. And I think a lot of times, like, we fall into that, I guess, example of giving too much feedback. And when we give too much feedback, it totally stunts the ability to critical think for that person. And we're taking that away from them. And we're not fostering an environment of deep learning. We're fostering an environment of, I guess, demanding, and for lack of better words.
We talked about self-awareness there. In the world of baseball, and it'd be interesting to get your opinion if this differs to soccer, but what are the key mental demands in baseball, and are they different to soccer?
That's a good question. I think that there's definitely some overlap, but I'd say there's a lot less, I guess, reaction in terms of, for soccer, if you mess up, you got to get back on defense.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, it's a quick response. Yeah. Where in baseball, you have a lot of time to think before you go back out there. And so where you're placing your thoughts and where you're focusing in those moments become really important. And, soccer 90 minutes versus a 3 to 4 hour game, having to also maintain a level of focus and knowing when to shut it down a little bit and then when to really become highly focused again. And managing our energy in those ways, too, is going to be super important for baseball. And I would say, too, like when it comes to energy management, in terms of intensity levels is important as well. Okay. Soccer, I would say, if I had to describe my intensity level on a scale from 1 to 10, I'd be about an 8. I was pretty highly intense, and it was pretty consistent throughout the And in baseball, you want a little bit more level, and you want to, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, the intensity level is a little bit more calm. And you want to get back to more of a relaxed, controlled state, where soccer control in terms of intensity wasn't always the most important. It was important with your footwork, but not exactly in terms of intensity. Sometimes that intensity allowed your footwork to be in control.
So what I hear you say is there's focus and intensity. There's the focus is the capacity, certainly in baseball, to turn up the volume of focus and turn down the volume of focus, perhaps to relax. And with intensity in baseball, you're going to be around about 5 out of 10, rather than in soccer, say 8 out of 10, where there's sort of continued intensity, if you like.
Yeah, and I would say, every person's different. There are some guys that are, when they're at bat, they'd probably label themselves at like an 8 too. But in terms of their baseline and going back to, they're going to go back a little bit, probably less than, I guess, maybe a soccer player or a football player would be.
Yeah. I think another interesting one for me in soccer is executing with positive intention. So one could call that confidence, I suppose, but the ability to execute every single action in a positive manner, in an approach manner, in a challenge manner, rather than a threat, rather than inhibited. And I'm guessing that's the same when you're at bat, when you've got that ball coming at you at, I don't know how fast it is. You can tell me 100 miles an hour or whatever, and when you're pitching, surely you have to execute things positively, and that in part is a mental demand.
Definitely, and we talk about the challenge versus threat mindset a lot, okay. And in terms of how our body responds to that, and how we respond to that, the different mindsets, and you're 100% right. When you say that, like, you have to be available and ready and have that intensity when, sometimes it is 100 miles per hour. It's coming at you, depending on the pitcher, but, and you have to be ready to throw it and throw it with intent. And that intention is so important in having that purpose behind it, because when you have milliseconds to respond to a pitch, you have to have a purpose. When you don't have a purpose, it makes it very difficult to respond to that.
So what do you mean by purpose? You have to have a purpose.
Well, when it comes to pitching, a pitcher may have 3 or 4 pitches.
Mm-hmm.
And so before he throws it, he needs to know what he's throwing, why he's throwing it, and how he's going to execute that. And each pitch may come with a different focus cue, depending on physically how he has to get his hand or where he has to get his arm slot. And so those things are important to note and what you're focusing on. Sometimes it's none of that. Most of the times it's not mechanics. Most of the times it's your location, where you want to throw the ball to. And that's typically wherever the catcher is holding his mitt. And then if you're a hitter, you're looking for certain cues from the pitcher that will kind of tip off what pitch he's throwing. And so you have milliseconds to respond. If you're looking for a fastball, you don't want to swing at a curveball. And so you're really paying attention to how that pitcher is moving, how his fingers look, how the ball's coming out of his hand. And that's what you're paying attention to as you're at the plate. And so when that happens, you have only milliseconds. And so you have to kind of know what you're looking for before you kind of step up to the plate.
That's really interesting. So would you hypothesize, is your opinion that the best batsmen in baseball historically have been the ones with the best perceptual skills, whether that's acknowledging cues, clues and triggers from the body of the pitcher, more so than, say, the ability to time a shot, a batting swing, if you like?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. Definitely.
What do you think? What do you think?
I think that regardless if your purpose is timing, because I do think, that's a huge piece of it. Okay. And I'm certainly no hitting coach or pitching coach, don't claim to be, but in talking to my athletes, some of the things that they say are most important is having a plan when they're at the plate, or knowing, committing to what they're throwing when they're pitching. And so regardless, each one, when they speak of success, they speak of having that purpose prior to taking action and knowing what they're looking for, knowing what they're trying to accomplish, and knowing what it's like to execute that.
Interesting. So you said that when they're doing well, they're committed to what they're going to throw. There's a plan. So when players come to you and they've had a poor game, they're a batsman, they've had a poor game, or they're a pitcher and they've had a poor game, they've pitched poorly, is it more often than not that they haven't committed to their plan, or they haven't had a clear plan? Where do baseball players, where do they tend to go wrong from a mental perspective?
A lot of times they see it has to do with the commitment part. Or maybe they know they want to throw something, but they don't feel comfortable necessarily throwing it. And so they may throw it, but they may kind of baby it a little bit, or they may not fully commit to that pitch. And so you can tell in terms of like the look of the pitch. Now, again, I'm not a pitching coach, so I may sound very green in saying this, but just the way that the pitch comes out, the way that they kind of, follow through with it, you can kind of tell there are certain inklings that kind of tip off like a pitching coach, where he'll say like, oh yeah, he didn't throw it completely. And now when I'm watching them, I can tell based on a little bit more intensity wise. I wouldn't say I have the eye in terms of saying like, oh, well, he did this or he did that, and like point out specific mechanics, but I can definitely say that there is an observable difference when you commit and when you don't. And I always say this to my athletes is that, would you be upset if you did everything you possibly could and still didn't get the result? And most of the time their answer is no. Like, what can you do at that point? And I said, well, how upset are you that you didn't give it all and you weren't able to fully commit, even though you don't feel like it, okay? Feelings separate. That part of it, like, that's frustrating, isn't it? And it's like 100%, yeah. And so the commitment piece becomes the piece that is tough for them. It becomes the piece that is like, they know how to do it. It's now finding a way to execute despite how they feel. And separating feelings and actions can become a really important piece.
I completely agree. I think that's a lot of our job, actually. I think that's a lot of our job. I think that's a lot of my work. And I come back to this notion of positive intention. And this is so, what you were describing there is so similar to golf. When you work with some of the best guys, and I know you've worked with golfers, and so many of them, I mean, we're speaking now, it's the Masters at the moment, and so many of them come Sunday afternoon, and probably on a Saturday afternoon and a Friday afternoon, they won't necessarily be executing with commitment, with confidence. And these are some of the best in the world, let alone your amateurs who just enjoy the game, is that positive intention with their actions, irrespective of their feelings, gets to the crux, in my opinion, of performance psychology.
Definitely. Yes, I totally agree. I think that separating those two, that is really the thing that holds back consistency in my mind.
Well, absolutely. And can I just say, for me, I think that starts, in my opinion, and I'm phenomenally biased being a sports psychologist, and you will be biased being in the same profession. It starts with a player, for me, putting the mental side first, almost. You know, when I work with footballers, if they've got a Saturday game, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for me, it's helping them get clear in their mind. This is what positive intention looks like. This is what commitment looks like. I will be swinging committed if it's a golfer. I will be playing with positive intention, irrespective of how I feel and irrespective of what goes on around me. It's selling that mental skills and mindset first, in my opinion.
You know, I never thought of it that way. I love how you just said that, and in committing to the mindset first, because it's what we're asking them to do. And I guess I never thought of it in that way when you just said that. But it's so true. It's knowing, it's knowing versus trusting, because we're not always going to trust every little bit of things that we do, but knowing that this is exactly what we need to do to be successful. And we know that when we do this, we are, and committing to that, whether or not we know it's going to work. I mean, that piece right there is, to me, like the epitome of sports psychology, and epitome of the mental game, and really the epitome of consistency.
Hugely. But this is what holds us back, is for me, Lauren, and I'll be interested to get your opinion on this, is that we are so socialised in sport, and think back to your soccer playing at college, we're so socialised in sport into outcome and performance. Outcome and performance. The outcome being win-lose, the performance being, completing our KPIs in soccer, our passes, getting shots away, etc. But we're not socialised into mindset and mental skills. And actually, if we design that and say, actually, first and foremost, I'm going to get those mindset and mental skills right, and that's going to drive my performance, which is going to drive the outcome or give us the best possible chance of an outcome, then that is a really powerful way of helping. You've said the word yourself, consistency. Consistency is that divine elixir in sports, isn't it? And it's, for me, that equation there helps promote consistency.
Definitely. Yeah, I love the way you describe that.
How much do you think, so when a batter is going into bat, I was going to try and use the terminology there, Lauren, but I don't know what the terminology for the... because all I could think there was cricket. I'm so English, I could just think of cricket, which is the batsman goes to the crease. So I'm sure it's not the same in baseball.
It's okay, I understand.
Body language, self-talk, attention, are those the kind of things that the mental skills that you're addressing with players as they're going into bat?
Yeah, definitely. I think self-talk's a huge one for any sport, but especially a sport where you have so much time to think. And we have a lot of, I guess, perfectionistic tendencies with a lot of our players. And I think as you go up, regardless of the athlete or regardless of the sport, the higher level you get, you run into a lot of these type of people. And it partially is what makes them so good at what they do, but then can also be their detriment. And a lot of times it's kind of like having these standards for themselves, which I love, but then it becomes kind of their enemy when they're not meeting them. And being able to monitor their self-talk, monitor their emotions, monitor that, and place their attention becomes very important regardless of the circumstance.
Absolutely. And that's when those personality almost brings us full circle back to talking about the personality characteristics and getting to know somebody. And when we know that they've got their that very high conscientiousness trait, their high in conscientiousness, that to me is perfectionism. And when we know they're like that, as you say, they're trying to get everything right, which is great for excellence, but it also has that element of self-sabotage, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. It can be so detrimental. It can be, oh my God, I'm so terrible. This sucks. And it becomes almost a part of their identity to some extent.
Interesting. Identity. Yeah. I mean, I think identity is really, that was a neat segue there. Identity is such a massive thing in sports, especially modern day sport, where players are so commercialized, and baseball's such a global sport. It's an enormous sport in America, and these players are idolized. And there must be so much of your work, again, I know you can't go into detail, but there must be so much of your work helping players establish well, multiple identities, or helping them deal with this notion of I'm Jack, I'm the baseball player, and helping them expand that identity?
Definitely. It's up until this point, a lot of these young men, they believe that they are baseball players. And there's so much more than that. And to me, it's so important that they know that, because it allows managing the game to be a little bit easier, a little bit more manageable. It allows things outside of the game when they're not going well. It allows that to be a little bit more manageable. And in terms, for me, sport is what drove me to this field. But what keeps me here is developing people in life. And I think sport is such a phenomenal platform for it, because I think it's kind of like a little microcosm of like what we deal with outside of sport, or in life outside of sport.
I think that's really well said. I absolutely agree. And it must be doubly difficult for baseball, because how many games are there on the road? I mean, it's just phenomenal, isn't it? It's just, it is just, that's your life.
Yes. It's over 100, 150. I mean, it's crazy. It's insane. And so if you think about half of your year is spent back-to-back days playing baseball. And then when you're not playing baseball, you're practicing, or you're working out, or, whatever that is in terms of your training schedule, it becomes a majority of your life. And so I think without that balance, failures become more than just a failure or an event. They can become kind of almost more permanent than just kind of a passerby.
Yeah, completely agree. How much work do you do with coaches? Does your role demand quite a lot of work with the coaching staff? Do you work through the coaching staff with the players as well as with the players themselves?
Yes, definitely. We have a phenomenal, I am biased, but we have a phenomenal coaching staff who is always open to learning and always open to developing. So we work with them a lot. And honestly, they teach us a lot. So it's really a partnership and a collaboration in terms of making each other better for the athlete. And developing, like we work through them all of the time, because we can't possibly be there all the time. We have a team, but we still are not enough of a team to be there all the time. And we would love to be there all the time if we could, but realistically, we have phenomenal people that are already there that we work through constantly to be able to maximize the potential of the player.
And what usually do coaches want from you as a sports psychologist within baseball? Is there a specific thing or specific things that they come to you and ask you about?
A lot of it's specific to players and to individuals, and a lot of it is concerns that they may have. And then other times it's how do I improve on my end? And so there's definitely a mixed bag of things that they're interested in. But I'd say probably the majority is about specific players.
Okay. And so you mentioned there that obviously you're not full time, and there's not necessarily right now the capacity to have that. So some of your work is done outside of baseball. What other sports have you been working in recently?
I work with, recently I just took on a dancer, and I work with a kickboxer, I work with a triathlete, and a couple golfers.
Okay. And how do you find the golf? Do you find that very different?
Yes, I do, and I love it. I really enjoy it, and it's quite funny. People ask me all the time, "Oh, do you work with your fiance?" And I'm like, no. He doesn't really want me telling him how to do a sport. And
so everybody knows, then your fiance is a professional golfer.
Yes, he's on the PGA Tour Canada, and we have lots of talks about the mental game, but it definitely. We do not work together, and I adore him, and he actually listens to me more than I expect him to. But yeah, he's phenomenal. But he does actually help me a lot in terms of, like, sometimes my clients will come at me with some terms. I'm like, what does this mean? And thank goodness for him, he's there to, like, answer that right away. And I'm like, can you explain this to me? Like, I think I have an idea, but can you explain how that would feel as a golfer? Like, why this is such a difficult moment. So I'm definitely not a expert in golf, but I really enjoy the sport, and I find it very different than, I would say, probably soccer, and a little bit similar to baseball. But it's a challenge that I love.
Well, there's so much downtime. So, it is similar in that respect, in as much as you've got to manage your energy, you've got to manage your focus, you've got to have a wave of focus. It goes up as you're reaching the ball and comes down after you've hit the ball. So it's, I could imagine there's some real similarities there. Definitely.
Yeah. We've had a lot of, because obviously I love sports psych. I have a lot of conversation with my fiance about it, just because I find so many similarities. The more that I'm work with baseball, I'm like, hey, do you agree with this? Like, do you ever feel like this too? And we found definitely some similarities to that, some that you've mentioned.
But that's fascinating, getting the opportunity to work with a dancer. That's again, it's a motor behaviour, isn't it? And when you've got to perform under pressure, you've got to perform and execute a motor behaviour under pressure. It's all very similar, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think it's more similar to some of the more intense sports, because it is like a nonstop action. There's not downtime, and so that is interesting, because I can relate to it a little bit more in terms of soccer.
Yeah.
But yeah, every sport and every athlete comes with its different challenges and different kind of uniqueness.
So would you love to work with soccer teams in the women's soccer league over there?
Oh, I would love to. I absolutely love to. That would be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a huge sport over in the States, soccer. It always amazes me. The participation levels are through the roof over there. I think I read one statistic that there's more registered players in the state of New Hampshire than there is in the whole of England. So, and obviously there's a population discrepancy there, but it's always amazes me how many people play soccer in America.
It's growing.
Okay.
And I love to see that, but it's definitely growing. And in terms of the MLS, like, it's the attendance numbers are growing, and more teams are popping up places. So it's pretty cool to see.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much. What's next for you? Just continuing to do the baseball and various bits and pieces, or have you got anything new and exciting coming up?
Yeah, right. I mean, right now it's going to be, my main focus is baseball and the Yankees, and working with our players there. But I am working on some stuff, potentially some online seminars coming up. So,
awesome. Right. So with that in mind, how can people find you, Lauren? Have you got social media? Are you a slave to social media like I am, or have you got an email address people can get hold of you?
Yes, definitely. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and my handle is at Lauren N. Abarca. And my Gmail is the same. It's laurenabarca@gmail.com. And you can find all that stuff on my Instagram or my Twitter. I have a link where you can go to see all of that.
Yeah, and I love your Twitter feed. I was reading, whilst doing some research for this, I was reading down your feed, and you've got some great quotes and little bits of advice. So well worth following Lauren on Twitter. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
No problem. Well, look, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch, whether that's via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think about the show. Be nice. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.